Welcome back, everyone. In today's session, we continue our exploration of the political and government environment, shifting our focus into deeper institutional and political factors that shape business strategy and economic decision making. We will begin by examining how different types of political system, from liberal democracies to authoritarian regime, affect economic governance. As globalization accelerates, understanding these variations become essential, especially for business operating across borders. Next, we turn to political stability. Why does political stability matter for firms? And how do political uncertainties like frequent policy shifts or electoral volatility affect investment decisions, inflation expectations, and business confidence? We'll also explore business political cycle, how governments may manipulate fiscal or regulatory policies to gain short-term electoral gains, and what this means for long-term macroeconomic management. Finally, we'll discuss tensions between governments and independent institutions, for example, central bank and government. Should a central bank be independent from political influence? What happens when short-term political gains conflict with the long-term monetary stability? So, through this session, you will see how the political environment, not just a backdrop, but a powerful determinant of business outcomes and market behavior. So, begin by exploring the types of political system and their economic implications. So, coming to the types of governments and political differences in a globalizing world, we can examine this from 5 dimensions. So, dimension one is electoral process and pluralism. So, this is one of the main difference. And the thing is that the question that we are going to ask here is that, are elections free, fair, and competitive? Do citizens have a real choice there? And then moving to the second one, civil liberties. So, to what extent are freedom like speech, press, and their associations are protected? Then moving to the third one, the functioning of government. Is the government effective, transparent, and accountable? That question we are going to answer in the case of functioning of government. Then about the political participation. So, do people actively engage in politics? Are all groups included in decision making? And then moving to the fifth dimension, what norms and values shape politics? How deeply our democratic principles are rooted? So, these factors help us understand why some governments are more stable or business friendly than others, and why firms must adapt their strategies accordingly. So, political stability plays a critical role in shaping the business environment. So, I'm presenting you a small case study showing, is democracy linked to economic success? So, I'm showing you some tables from some case studies. So, the point here is that we categorize the countries across the world into different types of political system. So, one you can see authoritarian, then there is hybrid mode between authoritarian and democracy, and there is flawed democracy, then full democracy. By flawed democracy, we mean for namesake there will be election, but mostly there is high evidence that the election process is manipulated in such countries. So, keeping this in mind, so we can categorize the countries. You can see that most countries are democratic. Mostly you can see the flawed democracy or full democracy, and the percentage of world population they live in, for example, 4.58% they live in flawed democratic setup. Then the query is that, what is the economic, the GDP of these nations? You know that actually the number of countries in the belong to high income is 79%. Of the world population is 16.16, and the middle income, you can see that 107. That means 75, approximately 75% of the world population live in middle income countries. But low income countries, you can see that clearly large number of population. Many people live in low income countries as well. So then when we categorize the economic development and the political system that they are having, so this table which I am showing here, the relationship between democratic status and income level. So you can see high income countries, how many of them have full democracy. So you can see here is that actually in high income countries, that 38% of the high income countries, they have democracy. Then 50% of them have flawed democracy, and authoritarian is only 13%. So similarly, middle income, low income, you can go through. Then based on the income classification, you can see, you can relate the association relationship between democratic status and the income level. So shortly, just to summarize, 88% of high-income countries are democracies, have democracies, and 97% of low-income countries are non-democratic. Then coming to the evidence whether democracy is associated with economic growth. In fact, there is a mixed impact. The evidence suggests that there is mixed impact between democracy and economic growth, because some scholars, they have argued that democracy contributes to economic growth, while others have argued that democracy prevents economic growth. So Lisset, they studied the relationship between economic growth and democracy, and they found a positive relationship. So the key suggestion from this study is that though they found a positive relationship, their main suggestion is that establish democracy in that society only after reaching a certain level of economic growth. That is their key suggestion. While some studies have claimed that there is a relationship between economic growth and democracy, while other studies claim a negative relationship or no relationship at all. So that means, in short, we have a mixed evidence on the relation between democracy and economic growth. So conclusively, we cannot say that democracy leads to economic growth. There is no solid, robust evidence to support this relationship. To explain the relationship between democracy and economic growth, there are different conceptual and theoretical framework and approach to interpret this relationship. One is called conflict approach. Conflict approach is that democracy and economic growth are incompatible, because the reason that democratic government hinders economic growth, the main reason is that democracy, because is led by politicians and they need to face election in every routine, every circle, maybe 3-year, 4-year or 5-year period. So that is the case. The policy, their economic policy, their public policy, all will be related to their economic gain. So maybe short term there may be an economic gain, but long term, because of that policy, it may hinder economic growth. But in contrast to this, what the conflict approach argue that authoritarian regimes can better achieve economic growth thanks to their high central powers. Autocratic regimes, I have written here, I have full text here, accelerate economic growth as they can easily limit consumption and pressure to increase savings to generate more income through tax. And dictators are more independent in decision making and can invest more productively. So they don't need to satisfy the electoral vote banks. So they can take decisions independently. They are assured that authoritarian, normally they are the permanent rulers, so they don't need to take into account so many other short-term aspects into consideration. So they can think of long-term economic growth. And the second one comes compatibility approach. In these schools of thought argue that, in contrast to conflict approach, they argue that democracies positively affect economic growth by creating an environment that provides more innovation and facilitates the venture process by facilitating transfer of economic authority and ensuring a stable economic environment and efficient use of resources. So in with democracy, as you are aware, there is freedom of expression and association are there, and there will be multi-party election, the rule of law, and the protection of human rights and separation of powers, and which all emerge from democracies, constitute the necessary institutional conditions and process for economic growth. So they give more freedom for all economic agents. They encourage private investment, entrepreneurship, innovations, and also there is if they ensure all these human rights and the basic values of life, and then according to this approach, it will promote economic growth, because it has the more compatible features that is essential for long-term economic growth. Then there is a skeptical approach. So what they say that they actually they lie between conflict approach and compatibility approach. What they argue that there's no systematic relationship between democracy and economic growth, and variability in the level of economic performance is more autocratic and more democratic regime. So there is no clear evidence in with democracy and economic growth. Then let's now move to the political stability part. So political stability, it plays a critical role in shaping the business environment. When governments are stable and policy direction is consistent, then firms can plan and invest with greater confidence. So, however, if there is a political uncertainty, especially around close elections, it can disrupt this environment. So the research which I am showing here, this research, what it shows that macroeconomic uncertainty increases significantly during close election, affecting key economic variables like inflation, wage rate, interest rate, and forex. So for business, this means that even democratic processes, while essential, can introduce volatility. So understanding these dynamics helps firms anticipate risk and respond more strategically during politically sensitive periods. So I have given you here some of the abstract of this study, and I would suggest you go through this full paper to get more insights how political stability and business environment are related, and especially with the close election. Close elections means suppose there are two political parties, the margin of their win will be very less, maybe 2%, 1%, 2%, 3%, or 4%. And suppose you see that there is more conservative and liberal party. Suppose there are one way more supply, more industrialist, and they follow, for example, more conservative policies. That is one group of political parties. Then you think about the other one, the leftist or more liberal political parties. They favor labor class and believe in giving more subsidy, taxing rich people, and giving more socio-economic policies, etc. So in those cases, suppose in that is the context. So you know that the liberal parties, they believe in more redistribution, taxing the rich and taking that money to the poor. At the same time, the conservative political parties, they believe in giving tax concession to the rich, and so they will be more business friendly group. They will be giving more incentive to entrepreneurs. So in that case, what happened that if there is a close election between these two parties and the margin is, for example, only 2 or 3%, for example, then what happened that both political parties, if there is a close election, they converge, because if the liberal parties, they will be a little bit forced to follow the conservative parties political ideology or their economic and political policies, public policies they have to follow, and similarly for the other parties as well, the other party. So there will be a convergence, or there will be some means there won't be, we cannot predict clearly whether this political party is going to follow their ideology or not. So simply say that actually political stability is an essential factor for economic business environment. Then moving further, it also determines what kind of market power an economy is in. The market structure in an economy, that also determines the business environment and also the role for government to intervene. So broadly, we can classify the market structure into four. One is called perfect competition. Perfect competition means ideally the most efficient market forms concerning social welfare. That means there is complete free competition. There is very minimal government intervention in the form of tax or subsidy or price setting or quantity setting. What to produce and what not to produce, and all determined by the market forces, not by government. That is the extreme form of competition. There is minimal government intervention. That means the prices and quantities and what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, all are determined by market mechanism. That is the one extreme. But on the other extreme, there are imperfect. In the imperfect model, there is monopoly market is there. For example, monopoly market means there is only a single seller here. For example, railway, Indian Railway is a monopoly. There is no other railway service provider. These days they are trying to include some more player, but overall you can see a monopoly is there. Then monopolistic competition means the real world that we are living, especially for the garments, restaurants, electrical and electronic item that all we buy. That market belongs to monopolistic competition. Actually, there is competition is there. At the same time, there is some monopolistic element. For example, garments, there is some brands. For example, you can say Raymond or Peter England or any other brand. So that brand name is creating monopoly environment for them. But at the same time, there is competition as well, because there are n number of other brands are already in the garments sector and in restaurant or electrical electronics. Then the coming another market form is called oligopoly. Oligopoly means, as with the classic example is airlines. For example, the Indian Airlines market, you know that there are only a few sellers, few players, and they have actually the pricing decision is mutually interdependent. So for example, there is Indigo Airlines. When they do the price setting, they need to look at, for example, Air India and other players. So clearly there is oligopoly few firms. Similarly, telecom market is oligopoly market. So the key point which I am trying to bring here is that when we try to understand the economic environment, we also need to know what kind of market structure a country is having. So suppose perfect competition is mainly in the agriculture sector, and especially in the Western countries, they have more competitive market, but not perfect competition. There is competitive market is there, and monopoly in some sector, there is monopoly is there, and monopolistic competition is in the world most prevalent market is monopolistic competitive markets that you can see around us. So suppose in country to country, if they move from country to country, which element or which kind of market form, which type of market form dominate, that's also determine how businesses can operate. It also makes how government can intervene. So the role of government also determined by the market for it. For example, if there are only few firms, for example, Indian banks, you know that the number of banks are around 15. At the same time, in the US, the number of banks are nearly 3,000, 4,000, ranging between around 4,000 banks are there. So coming to here, if suppose one bank is too big, then the thing is that, and it has a dominant market power, market force and transaction, then it will be that institution has some incentive for taking more risk or behaving something against the normal economic rationality. So before I moving to that, this concept called too big to fail, it was popularized by Stewart in 1984. So this is mainly too big to fail is a concept used for banks or financial institutions that are so big and interconnected that if they fail, the economy is at risk of substantial damage. And as a result, what happened that the term gained more popularity during 2007-8 financial crisis. At that time, there are so many big investment banks, because there may be so many investment banks, large investment banks. So government couldn't allow them to fail because of the financial crisis. crisis, JP Morgan kind of financial institutions, they are almost failed. And at that time, government has to intervene, because failing similar kind of institution, similar financial institution is going to give big shock waves in the economy, is also going to hinder the smooth working of the economy. So then government has to intervene, bail out such financial institution. So if you relate to Indian context, just that State Bank of India, this is the largest Indian commercial bank. What if it fails? You know that it is going to give a shock tremor waves across the country, not only nationally, even internationally, because it's the largest commercial bank. And then as a result, if this bank, for example, such a large bank, large financial institution, they will engage in moral hazard incentive. For example, moral hazard means actually they will be giving risky loans, taking risky investment, because they think that in case if they fail, the bank fail, government is there to save them. So that means they have incentive to take risky investment and giving more loans to high risk individuals and firms. So in this case, what happened that if there are more such firms, that too big to fail firms are there, but their overall present, the percentage number wise, there are a few in the economy, then they have that incentive to take more risk, and then that will overall affect the economic efficiency of such banks and such financial institutions. So then moving to the another point, the third point in this topic, theme, that is called political business cycle. So the political business cycle, it means there are several studies also there on the political business cycle. They found that economic activities have often been used as means and instruments in political gains. So the political business cycle is the hypothesized tendency of governments to adopt expansionary fiscal policies and often monetary policies as well, especially in election years. So in this context, fiscal expansion takes the form of tax cuts as quickly as spending increases. So the key point here is that, especially the political business cycle, that means especially the politicians, they make advantage of fiscal and monetary policies for the short-term economic gains in order to please the vote bank, in order to win the election. So accordingly, instead of looking at the long-term economic prospects, economic stability and economic growth, the politician would look more for their own political gain, and all the economic policies and economic and political institutions will be used for their benefit. So this theory was initially designed with advanced countries in mind, and some comprehensive empirical studies find the evidence that political budget cycle is present in both developed countries and less developed countries, but developing countries are thought to be even more susceptible to the political business cycle than advanced countries. That's the key finding here. So one interpretation is that institutions such as constitutional separations of powers in the budget process are necessary to resist pro-cyclical fiscal policy, and these institutions are more often lacking in developing countries. Then some more studies, for example, Brender and Drazen, they offer another interpretation. The findings of a political budget cycle is a large cross-section of countries is driven by the experience of new democracies, the most of which are developing or transition countries, where fiscal manipulation by the incumbent government succeed politically because voters are inexperienced with the elections. So the main point I'm trying to state here is that politicians in such countries, especially in low and middle income countries, they try to make advantage of the existing economic and political and other institutions for their short-term gains. Then that will hinder economic growth. So to elaborate this one, there is one school of thought called opportunistic political business cycle. They follow from two assumptions. Economic conditions before an election significantly affect voters' choices, and politicians know this and try to take advantage. So that means during the close to the election, they will be more generous and they will be spending more in the terms of socio-economic measure policies, and also they will be trying to ensure high employment, low inflation, especially during the election period. So just look at this figure, his histogram. What is showing that this is study, they depicting the personal disposable income from 1947 to 2007. So what it shows that the period, for example, the first 1 year, when somebody elected to their office, it shows the first 1 year. Taking during this period, they have taken first 1 year when they are in office. So for the first 1 year, you can see that they have, when the new term begins, this is data point 1, this is another time period, this another time period, another period. This is in fact when a new government is in place in different time period between 1947 to 2007. What you can see that the economic growth is at a low space, low economic growth, right? The economic growth is very low here. But then you can see that the next year, the second year, the average of the non-election year, you can see that even the point here is that coming to the first part, this part, you can see that economic growth is there but low. But when you go second year, you can see the economic growth become even worse, it become negative. In the third year, economic growth little bit revived. But during the election period, when the fourth time point during this period, you can see that the economic growth is at a high pace. That means just before the election, there is economic growth is there. Then immediately after the election, you can see that it drops. It's again become like this. It becomes low economic growth, right? So what the main point here is that they make use, the politician, according to this hypothesis, this study, they make the political system, the political policy, economic institution, other institutions in their favor, and they make them to please the voters. They, for example, they during election year, just 1 year before the election, they reduce the rate of interest, they reduce the tax cut will be there, there will be more subsidy will be given, and inflation they try to minimize, reduce. During the election time, just before election time, they reduce the rate of interest. In order to do that, they pump more money in the economy. So that time there will be more economic growth. But after the election, the adverse effect of increased money supply takes place. There will be inflation. Then also it hinders the economic growth. So in order to do that, there is one more theorem, supporting theorem in that is called Ricardian equivalence. The theoretical background underpinnings here is that when government runs a deficit by borrowing money to finance its spending, individuals anticipate that future taxes will be raised to pay off the tax. So that means if people are getting some transfer payment from government, or if there is a tax cut, what they will anticipate that in the future government is going to increase tax. So that means if they gain something now, they know that government is going to take back later on. So accordingly, it's not going to make any impact on people. So there is a related concept that is called voter myopia. Voter must be myopic for the story to work. If the voters realize that lower taxes today were really only masking higher taxes tomorrow, they would not reward the incumbent. Then coming to some more aspects of political and government environment, that is called independent of institution. So case for government, I'm just putting a case of the independence of central bank, and especially the case of governments versus central bank conflict. So especially when it comes to the central bank independence, there are 5 key dimensions. One is called goal independence. So in setting the goal of monetary policy, central bank's goal, whether they are free from political influence. Second one, by using the instrument, monetary policy instrument like I'll be discussing this concept thoroughly in one of the session in the future, in the coming days. For example, open market operation, cash reserve requirement, and the bank rate. Does the central bank has freedom in choosing this? And functional and operational independence, and financial independence, and legal independence. These are the 5 key dimensions where we can measure the independence of central banks. Of these, this is the one, the goal independence and the instrument independence and functional independence are considered are the key dimensions of independence. So Whether the question here is that should the central bank be independent or should they be aligned with the government, central government of that respective country. The strongest argument for an independent central bank rests on the view that subjecting it to more political pressure would impart an inflationary bias to monetary policy. Not only that, political pressure would impart an inflationary bias to the monetary policy. It also will encourage a political business cycle. If the central bank are not independent, and if the political system or the government has more control over the central bank, then they will make advantage of this central banking system and they will use it for their advantage, and which we have already seen the political business cycle. For example, taking a case during election time, suppose the central bank has less freedom and this has to act according to the wish of the central government, then during election time, just be a few months before the election, there will be expansionary monetary policy at the time of election. So at that time, in order to please the people and the other institutions, firms, government will increase money supply. That will reduce the rate of interest. But you know that afterwards, when the election is over, afterwards the increased money supply is going to give a negative result, because high money supply over 6, 7, 8, 9 months after 1 year, and there is going to create more inflation, and then after certain point of time the interest rates also began to increase. Not only that, the central bank, if it is not independent, the government can through the central banking system, the government can facilitate treasury financing of large budget deficit. So the politician can use through the central bank extract the funds from the public sector banks and other financial institutions to finance the budget deficits. So at the same time, there are the case against independence is that proponents of central banks under the control of respective national government argue that is undemocratic to have monetary policy controlled by an elite group that is responsible to no one. This undemocratic, they are not accountable to the general public, and not only that, they argue that both fiscal policy and monetary policy should go together. It should be aligning. There shouldn't be any conflict. So it should go together. So that means fiscal policy by the central government and monetary policy by the monetary authority or the central bank. So it should go together. So this figure shows the inflation rates and the central bank independence. So higher the central bank independence, you can see that the inflation rate is very less, and lower this side you can see one means lower central bank independence, then the inflation rate is very high. So there is some relationship is already there. There are so many studies. One study I'm just showing here to show that there is impact on economic growth. There is control over the inflation. Independent central banks are associated with the lower levels of inflation, but is not associated with a high economic growth. And I have some slide for you to just go through how independent is the US central bank, how independent is European central bank, how independent is other foreign central banks, and also about RBI, how independent is RBI. So in this session, we have covered the political system and institution shape economic outcomes, and understanding these dynamics is key for business operating in diverse and evolving political context. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next session. Thank you.